Hello again. It's John Florez with a few production observations from way back in the 60s and 70s and what it was like to be a producer and what basically shaped my mindset at the time compared to, say, now, well after the fact, since I've been retired for over 30 years. I don't know if this will interest some of you, but I know that several people have written me and said, "You're teaching us building blocks of record production. And for instance, is it instinctive? Is it something you can learn or be taught?" So I thought maybe I'd try to kind of do a grab bag of all these questions and topics that have been presented to me, tie them all together, bring them into the present, and wrap it up with that. But let's start first with a little health update. I ended up having a stent put in my heart. There was a 90% blockage that was originally diagnosed as a stomach problem. So I was given stomach pills and then rushed to the operating room where they put in a stent. So it's all good. And this is payback for having eaten really badly for many, 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 many years. I am the junk food king, or at least I was. I've lost 20 pounds since I started eating healthier, and it's not as bad as I thought it would be. Some of this food is actually somewhat tasty, but it's not as gluttonous and fun as the bad stuff. Anyway, all is well, feeling pretty good, and so let's dig into record production. So back in the days when I got started, I learned by doing. So I started in a studio in Phoenix, Arizona called Audio Recorders of Arizona, later Audio Video Recorders of Arizona. And I worked with Tim Ramsey, the owner's son, and we produced everything that we could find in town. We just had a blast. And though the money came out of my pocket, it was at a greatly reduced hourly rate at the studio because Tim Ramsey, the owner's son, was learning to engineer at the same time I was learning to produce. So I was teaching myself, and I had very little knowledge whatsoever. And then what happened is, instead of working my way up through the ranks, like everybody else who was doing in Hollywood and New York and Nashville, all the music capitals, I lucked out and was given a job as a staff producer at RCA as my very first job in the business. So what an amazing happening that was. I have to say that it was a spiritual event. I actually had a premonition that it was going to happen before it did, but I had no idea the spectacular level that it would happen at. So, for instance, being a producer at a major label for your first job in music ever, I was still a senior in college, for goodness sakes, and I thought, oh, pinch me, life is so good. Well, what RCA taught me in terms of is record production taught, skills were taught to me at RCA that did not apply to independent producers who were going into the studio to make hit records. At RCA, we were taught to be administrators. So we learned how to budget, we learned how to contract musicians, or at least call the contractor and tell them what musicians we wanted. We hired cartage firms to bring various pieces of equipment into the studio. We hired background singers. We worked with song pluggers to find the very best songs possible when we needed good new songs, say the artist didn't write them. Grazing in the Grass, from the lyrics were put together by the lead singer of the Friends of Distinction, Harry Elston. So we already knew what our first single release would be. It was a great song. It was the vocal version of Grazing in the Grass, which had been a #1 hit as an instrumental. But if we needed songs, I learned where to call in the major song publishing firms like Chappell and Screen Gems and Warner Brothers and many, many others. A lot of the independents who were my best buddies. And I've documented those in my Song Pluggers video that I cut for you guys a few months ago. Anyway, you got all the songs together, you rehearsed, you went in, you brought it in under budget, and then you mixed it all down after doing the performances or overseeing the performances, and then handed it off to the label. And then at RCA, it was next. What do you do next? So it was an administrative job. I was lucky in that they allowed me to choose some of the artists that I worked with. Other producers at RCA were assigned artists that they had to work with. So for instance, Ray Cork, when he came aboard, was assigned Jack Jones. He was assigned other people as well. Zager and Evans, who sang in the year 2525, he was assigned them. Jack Please was assigned a number of middle-of-the-road classic singers. Rick Gerard, however, was like me. He got to pretty much pick whatever he wanted. And I was lucky that way. I remember I was several months into that job and hadn't produced anybody yet for RCA, and my boss said, for God's sakes, find somebody. And I did, and that was the Friends of Distinction. And the Friends of Distinction introduced me to Willie Hutch, a prominent songwriter and singer in town, and Willie became my second artist, along with the Friends of Distinction, my first. I was very lucky that way. So I learned, again, on the job, but I learned the administrative skills from RCA. I had veteran producers who actually sat in the studio next to me during sessions and helped me get my feet wet as a professional record producer. They made comments and suggestions, and I appreciate them to this day. What was an unintentional consequence of this training, however, was a mentality that I wish I didn't have or hadn't picked up as part of this training, and that was next, next, next. So I wasn't like the independents who I admired so much, who went in and said, we are going to go in and make a hit record, okay? And we're going to spend a lot of time making sure that it's a hit record. We're going to play it on our car radios before it's released. We're going to just mix it to death until it just sounds, or to life until it's just wonderful. We're going to have the perfect song with the perfect act, and we're going to make something very different and commercial and see what happens. Now again, it went into the payola machine or not after you made the record, but it's the mentality I'm talking about. In my brain, it had been implanted that I was an administrative producer. Who you doing next? Okay. Then we'll do this next. Okay. And then when I went independent, it was kind of the same. Whatever was offered me was next. I didn't sit with, say, an arranger-composer like Ray Cork or Darnell Pershing, my best friend, and say, let's create the best hit record we can at the moment, and let's either find somebody who can do it or find somebody who, like the Friends of Distinction, already had a hit song with Grazing in the Grass that they were rehearsing before it was ever a hit. Okay, that required this thing that independents had that I didn't have because I was basically an administrative producer. Give John what's next, and he'll find the material and put together people and make a good record. Not necessarily a hit record, but he'll make a good record. John will make a good record and bring it in on or under budget. That's a mentality that if I had to do it all over again upon leaving RCA, I would have spent markedly more time trying to take the time to make sure I was finding and assembling all the elements of a super smash record instead of just taking the next group. I specialized in vocal groups or vocalists and just producing a good record with them. There's a difference. And I didn't know it then because I just took whatever was next. Okay, mixing is something that is really an art form unto itself. And this is an interesting story I've never told before, at least it's interesting to me. But it's the fact that I was offered a choice in the early days at RCA of choosing engineers. I had to choose between Hank McGill, who had been Creedence Clearwater Revival's engineer prior to coming to RCA, or Grover Helsley, who was an orchestral engineer. Well, I didn't want to make the choice. I wanted to use both of them, but there was politicking going on at RCA between those two engineers, and they both wanted an exclusive on my business at the label. So I was forced to choose. Now looking back, I chose Grover Helsley because of kind of the emotional component. We were very compatible and very easygoing, and everything Grover recorded in terms of technique was very, very nicely done. In retrospect, however, Hank McGill made more pop or radio-ready mixes conceptually. This is huge, meaning his rhythm section was much more in your face than Grover's. Okay, so Creedence Clearwater Revival, you understand that, and then Hank just got better and better. If you listen to our Willie Hutch tracks, those are tracks that Hank engineered and mixed, you'll hear this rhythm concept is much more prominent than any of my mixes in those days that I did with Grover, and that was for several years with Grover. Hank's were more commercial. Commercial wasn't part of my attitude. Again, remember, I was an administrator, so I kind of wanted it to be an easy experience, just a laid back, who's coming up next, let's sit down and we'll just do this, okay? I wasn't thinking, let's slam it in the audience's face and make sure that this thing pops at you and rocks. That's why I had to remix Rock the Boat, because Grover and I made a mix that would bore the tears out of you. If you heard the original album mix, we had to go in and pretend we were Hank McGill and just put the drum set right in your face so that that beat, that dun 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 dun, dominant. Okay, so with mixing, I didn't become, no, I'll tell this a different way. With mixing, in the original days at RCA was a union shop. So the producers weren't allowed to touch the board. They weren't allowed to adjust levels or EQ or anything. Some cheated and did a little bit of that, but you were forbidden by the union to do that because you didn't have a union membership to mix. So when I became independent, I began co-mixing. So I mixed with the recording engineer. Generally, I handled the vocals. So I handled the lead vocal and the background vocals. And I wanted them to be in a certain perspective. A couple engineers at Wally Heider's thought that I brought up the background vocals too loud when it was time for the big choruses. But I enjoyed the heck out of doing that. But I didn't know much about EQ at all. And I certainly didn't know anything about compression or any of the techniques that would hype a record to be more radio friendly. I had no idea. Okay, so I went into the studio and I mixed the vocals and that was fine. But I remember Larry Cox, who was my dear friend for many decades. I remember Larry Cox pretending to turn an EQ knob on the mixing console and say, "Does that sound better, John?" And I'd say, "Yeah." And he hadn't done anything. And he was purposely tricking me, and this big smile would break out. He'd say, "John, I didn't do anything. I didn't change anything." So I didn't know anything about mixing other than it needed to sound pleasant. Again, that's the administrator's attitude as opposed to the let's really sock it to them in the mixing booth. No, I was administrating. So I didn't know anything, and it wasn't until the mid-'80s when I was virtually out of the business at that time that I learned to EQ on my own and I learned to hype on my own. So I started getting good as my career was getting over. So you can go to a recording academy and learn mixing. But what I want to stress again is once you have the knowledge, it's the attitude of the mix that's important. It's the attitude to make it as hypey and powerful as you can. You were competing with every other record made out there, and boy, this thing better rock. I didn't get that till almost 20 years into a career, can you believe it? Okay, and then finally, I've just got to add the spiritual component to this because it's really, really important. You can call it luck, and in many cases it may be. Because, for example, Grazing in the Grass with the Friends of Distinction was not promoted by RCA. It was broken nationwide by a friend of mine here in Phoenix who was program director of KRIZ. All the payroll money in the world, none of which came from RCA, was not available, and this thing just happened. The number 3 record in the country, Grazing in the Grass, just happened. Same thing for Going in Circles, our second gold record with Friends of Distinction, and with Rock the Boat by the Hughes Corporation. They happened. Rock the Boat out of a dance club, of all places. That's how it went to radio first. Okay, so was it luck? Yes, it was very lucky. Was I lucky to get a job as my first job in the industry as a staff producer? Yes, I was lucky. When my career ended, was that the luck of the draw that it was over for me? Was that all I had to give? Was that the time that I was supposed to go? Well, I went, and I've been a computer tech and trainer for 34 years. That was a profession that I thought I was going to be in for a few months while I tried to have another hit record or find a big money career. No. I'd like to use the example like this. It just came to me. At the Arizona Songwriters Association, I asked for the members of the Songwriters Association to raise their hand if they ever heard me speak before, and a bunch of them did. And I said, okay, you guys ignore everything I taught you in the previous lectures. Why did I say that? Because I taught them the smart way to get attention in the record business. But when I look back at my own career, what happened? I didn't have control over any of that. None of those moves would have mattered, whether they were political schmoozing, doing drugs, having sex, payola, doing whatever. All of my stuff, from getting the job to my hit records, happened by themselves. And I would choose to say they happened spiritually because they were supposed to happen. I'm going to attribute that to, as we say in AA, a higher power, a greater consciousness than ourselves, whatever you want to call it. But it all happened. And my exit from the business, which, unlike David Foster, who's still producing records into his 40th year of producing or something like that, that wasn't apparently my path, because the amazing coincidences that happened to stop my record career when it was stopped were just as if we were reading it now in retrospect, say, the door is closing and it's closing for a reason. You've had a lot of fun for a lot of years making records, John. Now it's time to go out and be of service to people. And I've been of service to people in the technology area for over 34 years. It's just astounding. It was not my choice. It's the way it happened. Okay, I believe I was led to the path that I've been on for so long. I believe I was led the entire lifetime, from birth till now. And in terms of now, a very prominent producer who still is active at my age said to me recently, don't you have just this urge to go make a great big hit record again, John? And I said, frankly, Tim, no, I don't. I really don't. I'm very happy remixing my old tracks and remixing some artist tracks on productions I didn't do, but that I love. With the technology that we have nowadays, the digital technology, I can put an Aphex Aural Exciter on projects when the Aphex Aural Exciter wasn't even invented yet. I can boost snare, I can boost bass drum, I can boost tom-toms, I can boost cymbal crashes, I can add or subtract echo. I can compress the daylights out of a track to make it sound more commercial, or I can do that very gently to give it a very mild boost. That's really fun for me. And, get this, even though I miss my entertainers who I love to this day, I prefer being by myself doing mixing. It's a solitary kind of thing, but think about it. There are no egos. There's absolutely no politicking. There's no payola. There's no anything. I'm here doing what I love to do, making things sound better. And to answer your guys' questions, this was all learned over time. Yes, people can learn this. They can learn all these skills. It helps if they have a great instinct, but all of us fail with our instincts too. Some of the productions that I thought were my best weren't. And some of the productions that I thought were just okay turned out to be big hits. I don't know. But what I do know is if you assemble the skill set and the timing is right, whether that be divine or maybe luck, you will have success. If the timing isn't right, I don't care how talented you are, you won't. There was one singer, Stephanie Phillips, way before Mariah Carey was a name, who sang like Mariah Carey. She had 4 octaves and could sing every note you could ever imagine, and she was potentially a superstar, Stephanie Phillips. I don't know where she is today. I don't think she became a star at the time, let alone a superstar, but she's one of several examples, Ron Canoli being another one that comes to mind, who's now a minister, who had incredible gifts and didn't make it huge. I'll give you one more, Willie Hutch. Willie Hutch, geez, the man wrote all the songs, played guitar on all of them, arranged all the musicians, contracted the musicians, contracted the singers, sang all of the tunes in one evening, back to back to back, and was basically a technical and emotionally, soulful superstar. He got some recognition at Motown, but not what other people got. For instance, not what the Hughes Corporation got with Rock the Boat, which was far inferior to what Willie was capable of and what Willie did. Okay, so it's not in our hands. It seems to be just the way it's meant to be, which is just fine. And thanks again for listening to this. I know I'm just an old guy kind of prattling on about stuff, but I did this because a lot of you asked for it. So that's the best I can do. And if something else comes to mind, I'll make another video. And if not, I guess I'm done for now.